June 19th has been celebrated as a day of independence from slavery since the end of the Civil War. But this year, the date known as Juneteenth has finally been recognized as a state and even a federal holiday. One of the local observances will be a focus on freedom taking place Saturday in Hyde Park at the Martini Shell on Truman Parkway. To tell us what's planned, or a community organizer and convener who's played a role in the founding of the Racial Equity Forum, Marcia Kimm-Jackson, and the area's district city councilor, Ricardo Arroyo. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. I want to start with Marcia. This is a first-time event in Hyde Park, but you've been involved in other events in Hyde Park. You're a community leader. So how does the Juneteenth celebration sort of extend the kind of things you've been involved in before?
Sure. So I've been in Hyde Park for more than 20 years, 25 years to be exact. This is my 26th year. And when I moved to Hyde Park, I am noting that the demographics was that it was majority Europeans. And having been here for the time that I've been, we've evolved to have more than 70% people of color living in Hyde Park. And so at the time that I moved in here, we were not having these kinds of conversations. And it was at the beginning of the neighborhood group that I started when I moved in 1995 that I decided to have small group conversations. And those discussions evolved to issues that were related to the community around race. There were sparse, there were tense, but this event represents the evolution of our conversation, represents the ways in which we become more conscious of who we are as a community and how much more willing we are to come to the table to talk about what it means to have an all-inclusive community. So this event really is a culmination of all the work that we've been doing in small groups. Yes, we're still talking about fighting crime. Yes, we're still talking about picking up trash, but this is really a come to Jesus movement, if you want to call it that, to really reckon ourselves with the history of Hyde Park, as it were, and where we are now. And I have to give kudos to our city councilor, Ricardo Arroyo, for really being at the impetus of this and in his own work, naming racism as a health crisis in Boston. So along with that, we were tracking with that to bring this conversation to the fore.
Councilor Arroyo, you have been in Hyde Park quite a while yourself. You've seen quite a few changes. How do you see this event fitting into that?
So I've been in Hyde Park the vast majority of my life. I call it home now, actually. Marcia is a neighbor as well. And so when we talk about Hyde Park, I think there's a perception of what Hyde Park is or what it used to be. But I was also taught Hyde Park's history. So I know about the Grimke sisters and their work with women suffragist rights. I've known about our abolitionist history. I know this was home to the first Black woman doctor in the history of this country. And so we have a proud history in Hyde Park of being on the right side of issues. And I think that the diversity and the openness that this community has now and that my constituency has now to really engage in difficult conversations about race, about difficult conversations about where we have fallen short as a community, where we can move forward as a community and how we can do that together has really been inspiring to me as a district councilor who represents these areas, but also as somebody who grew up and has lived here my whole life and recognizes that that was not always the reality for people growing up in Hyde Park.
Go back to Marcia Kimm-Jackson. Juneteenth has been celebrated in this country for quite a long time. There has been a lot of evolution in how it's celebrated, but something really dramatic happened over the past year. What's your take on that?
Yeah, Juneteenth has, for some people, mixed messages, right? So we know that the evolution of Juneteenth from really Texas that spread with the Great Migration really brings to the fore the discussion of what it is that is American history. And so I think for me, what I know about the various celebrations is that they have had mixed messaging. Is this Black history? Is it American history? Is it good history? Certainly, it's painful history for all of us because we now know that there were some secrets that were kept. We also know that the Emancipation Proclamation didn't really give us everything we needed, right? But it was, in fact, a joyous moment because it was an anticipation of what true freedoms looked like. And so I think for me, this now means that we are coming to a place of acceptance of what all of American history should look like and include, and also to a place of understanding that there are some things that we need to grapple with as a country, as a community. And that's what I think is happening now. And of course, the murder of George Floyd graphically, internationally, has made us stand up. But I know from my community, in my family, we've always celebrated Juneteenth. And we've always had family over. And some communities have done that, not many, but now the national recognition has given us all much more impetus and encouragement to do this without being embarrassed, without having to hide, without any confusion. And that, I think, is a great thing.
Councilor, how do you see that affecting the celebration in Hyde Park? Because, you know, you hear of a lineup of things in this ceremony here. You've got things that are a little bit like a 4th of July, but you've also got some serious focus on racial equity too.
I think it's important, you know, we have just grappled with, and I think part of why Juneteenth has expanded in terms of its scope and the way people see it, not so much in its importance to the communities that it's always been important to, but in emerging in new communities, is because we've grappled with this idea of what's American and what is of here and what isn't here and what is of us and what isn't of us. And in those histories and in those tellings, African-American achievements, African-American culture, Black culture, Black experiences aren't often reflected. And I think this country has had a real, and that expands all the way down to the micro level of Hyde Park, and all of these neighborhoods have really grappled with what history have we lifted up, what history have we not covered, whose experiences and life experiences are we not speaking to, and what constitutes being American, what's that tapestry, the tapestry of that look like. And I think when we talk about Juneteenth as this celebration is told, this is really lifting up and telling people in Hyde Park who have often not seen themselves reflected in spaces, frankly, in spaces, neighborhood spaces, as well as municipal government spaces. These changes of having an elected, I'm the first elected of color, for instance, in the City Council district seat. Those changes are new, and these reflections of seeing themselves in places of power, their stories lifted up, their heritage is lifted up, their history is lifted up. I think that's a beautiful thing that's happening, but I also think people, due to the experiences we've had in this country under the last president and the sort of rising tide of anti-Blackness, frankly, that we've experienced, there's a certain level of relief and happiness and joy in being able to share with your neighbors your history and your place, and to feel like you belong, because you do. And so this is a very important step, I think, not just for Hyde Park, but for the simple fact that it's taking off in the way that it is locally and nationally. I'd like to think it's for those reasons.
Marcia Kimm, one thing that's definitely getting more attention in recent years is the importance of Hyde Park in connection with the 54th Regiment. That's going to be sort of represented on Saturday, right?
Absolutely. The 54th Regiment has a critical place in American history and in Hyde Park history. And so we have a color guard that's going to be with us from the infantry, Company A. And they'll be opening the ceremonies, as it were, and then they'll be closing the ceremony. And then they'll have a display of some of their paraphernalia, some of the things that they would use as they trained at Camp Meigs, or as they entered into the war, or even some of the clothing that they wore. And they have actually a great cachet of memorabilia, a huge cachet. And so we've been thinking about how we memorialize them and how we have a museum for them, but that's after the fact. On Saturday, folks will get to see some of that stuff and talk to some of the Company A members about the 54th's presence in Hyde Park, even to this day, working to really keep the history alive.
Councilor, there will also be, I don't want to upstage you too much here, but looks as if you got a lot of elected officials coming to join in too.
Yeah, so the mayor and Congresswoman Presley will be there. Mayor Janey will be speaking. Congresswoman Presley is a Hyde Park resident, and she'll be speaking. And so I look forward to that, because those are valuable voices. You're talking about I believe the first Black woman Congresswoman. Well, I know that for a fact. I believe, though, it's the first African-American Congressperson that this state has had. Now you have the first Black woman mayor, both the first Black person and the first woman to be mayor. Those are two historic people. They're living history. And I think to have them here celebrating and speaking to Juneteenth, the date the official, end of slavery. That's like just a phenomenal loop. And so I look forward to those speeches.
Marcia Kim, one of the other speakers, or at least performers, Ashley Rose, a spoken word poet. What do you expect from her?
Oh, Ashley has been, in her own right, an activist. She has done this work for so many years and brings a different level of consciousness that's really compelling, I think, for us. So I certainly expect her poem to reflect the yearnings and the celebrations that we have around this holiday, but as well as amplifying the struggles that we have as a people in this nation and in this city. And so Ashley has always, in my opinion, brought her artistry in its most excellent form when she shows up, and I expect no less this time.
Finally, Marcia, very briefly, I know it's an outdoor event, but there are some restrictions you got to look out for. If people need some information about how to get cleared to attend, is there some way that they can do that, maybe by going online?
Yeah, certainly. First, we recommend that everybody who plans to attend register, because we have this process that will allow us to do two things. One is, of course, to capture who's coming so we can plan on head count and spacing. But the other is that we're still in the pandemic, believe it or not. I know we're thinking that we're out, but we're not quite out yet. And so it allows us to have a way to do any contact tracing if we need to do that. And so that mechanism of registering will be the conduit through which we will reach out to those who are coming to let them know that, yes, bring your mask because we're encouraging you to stay safe. And yes, bring a chair. And yes, you'll be socially distant. And yes, there'll be hand sanitizer. And so we're hoping that people will get that messaging through that Eventbrite link. But if in fact they don't have that link, they can certainly, I think on the press release, I have my phone number, but I also recommend that they go to the West Fairmount Hill email address, which is West Fairmount Hill, C as in cat, G as in girl, @gmail.com. West Fairmount Hill, CG @gmail.com. Email us there. We have a Facebook page as well, but we think that's the most direct way to reach us, by emailing us.
Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Marcia Kimm-Jackson and City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo. We'll have more news in just a moment.